The Hargrove Meridian sat 61 floors above Chicago, the kind of restaurant where the menu had no prices, and the waitstaff spoke in half-whispers, as though volume itself were somehow vulgar. Stuart Aldgate had reserved the corner table 3 weeks in advance, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows that turned the city into something like a jewelry box, all amber and silver against the January dark. He straightened his cufflinks and checked his watch. 8:15. Renata was late, which meant she was making him wait on purpose, which meant tonight was going to be exactly the kind of dinner he'd been dreading. He was 53 years old, the founder of Aldgate Capital, and he had not become a man who controlled $400 million in assets by being careless. He had, however, become a man who was lonely in ways that were difficult to name, and Renata Voss had walked into that loneliness 6 months ago with the precision of someone who had practiced. The maitre was guiding her across the room now. Tall, dark-haired, dressed in something the color of a bruised plum. Stuart stood. He always stood. His mother had taught him that. He did not notice the child until he nearly stepped on her. She was crouched beside the service corridor, half hidden by a potted fern that was probably worth more than most people's car payments. Maybe 10, maybe 11. It was hard to tell because she was so thin, the kind of thin that isn't a body type but a circumstance. Her coat was a man's jacket, far too large. The sleeves rolled 4 times over her wrists. Her shoes had a hole near the left toe. She had brown eyes that were watching him with an expression he couldn't immediately classify. Not fear, not hope, but something in between. Calculation, maybe. Or courage that was still deciding whether to commit. "Are you all right?" he said, instinctively lowering his voice. She didn't answer right away. She looked past him toward Renata, who was still making her way through the dining room, stopping to straighten a strand of hair in the reflection of a mirror. Then the girl looked back at Stuart. "Don't drink anything she gives you," she said. He blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The wine. Don't drink it if she pours it herself." A waiter materialized from somewhere behind him. "Sir, I apologize." She slipped past the kitchen entrance. "We're just going to—" "It's fine," Stuart said, and he wasn't sure why he said it. "She's fine." The waiter hesitated. Stuart kept his eyes on the girl. "What's your name?" She pulled the oversized jacket tighter around her shoulders. "Pip, Pip. Okay." He crouched down so he was at her level, ignoring the fact that his suit trousers were going to need pressing tomorrow. "Where are your parents, Pip?" Something moved across her face, the briefest shadow, and then it was gone. "Gone," she said, in the flat, factual way that children sometimes use when the truth has already done all the damage it can do. He held her gaze for a moment. Then Renata's hand landed on his shoulder and he stood up. "Stuart, darling, who is this?" Renata's smile was the kind that doesn't involve the eyes. "A young friend," he said. "How charming." She laughed, just lightly enough to be dismissive without being obviously rude. "Shall we sit?" "I'm absolutely famished." He looked back at the girl one more time. She was watching Renata the way a small animal watches something it knows is a predator. Still, careful, certain. Dinner was pleasant on the surface in the way that landmines are pleasant surfaces. Renata ordered for both of them, without asking, which she knew he didn't like, and then ordered a bottle of Barolo that cost more than Stuart wanted to think about. She was charming and warm, and asked all the right questions about his week. And somewhere between the amuse-bouche and the entree, she refilled his wineglass herself, setting the bottle back down before the sommelier could reach it. Stuart looked at the glass. "Don't drink it if she pours it herself." He thought about the girl's face, the way she'd said it, not panicked, not dramatic, just quietly certain, the way someone is when they've seen something they can't unsee. He picked up the glass. He set it back down. He told Renata he was trying to cut back. "You?" She laughed again. "You barely drink as it is, doctor's orders," he said, and watched her expression, just for a half-second, flicker. He excused himself after the main course, telling Renata he needed to make a call. Instead, he walked to the kitchen corridor. The girl was gone. He found the maitre d'hors and quietly asked where she'd gone, and the man looked uncomfortable and said one of the busboys had given her a roll from the bread basket before security asked her to wait outside. Outside. In January. In Chicago. Stuart got his coat from the check and walked out through the side exit. She was sitting on a heating grate around the corner, the jacket pulled up around her ears, eating what remained of a dinner roll with the focused intensity of someone for whom food is never casual. He sat down next to her on the grate. She didn't seem surprised. "You're going to ruin your suit," she said. "It's already ruined." He looked out at the street. Cabs were streaming past, yellow lights blurring in the cold. "How long have you been out here?" She shrugged one shoulder. "Few weeks." "There's a shelter on Wabash, but they make you leave by 6 in the morning, and you can't come back until 4. And it's hard in the middle." He understood what she meant by the middle. The hours when the city belonged to everyone but you. "How did you get into the restaurant?" "Kitchen entrance. Chef propped the door open when he goes out for a smoke. I just needed somewhere warm." She paused. "I wasn't going to steal anything." "I know," he said. She looked at him sideways. "You don't know that. You just met me. You could have kept quiet and stayed warm longer if you'd let me drink that wine." She considered this. Then she went back to the dinner roll. "What did you see?" he said after a moment. She was quiet for long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. "Then, I was in the corridor behind the private dining area. There's a storage room with a broken lock, good place to sleep. I heard her talking on the phone. She thought I was furniture, I guess. People do." Another pause. She said something like, "The Barolo is fine, I did it already." Then she laughed. She said, "He won't taste it. He doesn't even like wine." Stuart was very still. "She sounded happy about it," Pip said. "That's what bothered me most. Not scared, not nervous. Happy." He sat with that for a moment. The wind came off the lake and cut through everything. "Why did you warn me?" he said. "You didn't know me." She looked at him then, straight and level. "Because you're crouched down," she said. "Most people don't." He didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. He sat on the heating grate next to a child who weighed maybe 80 pounds soaking wet, and he let the cold work on him, and he thought about all the things he should have been paying attention to and hadn't. Inside, Renata was probably finishing his wine glass for him. He called a detective he trusted, a woman named McGarry, who had done quiet work for him before. From the sidewalk while Pip waited, stamping her feet against the cold, he gave her what the girl had told him. McGarry said she'd make some calls. He went back to the restaurant. Renata was on her phone when he returned, and she put it away too quickly and smiled too brightly and said she'd been worried. He told her he wasn't feeling well and paid the check and put her in a cab and went back outside. Pip was still there. "You didn't have to come back," she said. "I know." He looked at her for a moment, the too large jacket, the shoes with the hole, the careful, watchful eyes. "Is there someone I should call for you?" he said. "Family? Anyone?" The shadow crossed her face again, the same one from before. "My grandmother was in Rockford. She died in October. That's why I'm here. I was staying with her. And before that, foster care. On and off." She said it the same way she'd said gone, like a fact that had run out of power to hurt her. Stuart nodded slowly. The cab line outside the hotel across the street was thinning out. A couple walked by arguing in low voices. The city moved around them, indifferent. "There's a hotel 2 blocks from here," he said. "Nothing fancy, but safe and warm. I can get you a room for tonight." She looked at him with an expression that was pure, undiluted suspicion. He appreciated it. It meant she'd survived. "I'm not going anywhere alone with you," she said. "Good," he said. "You shouldn't. I'll get the room at the desk and you'll walk there yourself, and I'll leave before you go inside. You'll have your own key." She studied him for another long moment. "Why?" "Because you're 11 years old and it's 17 degrees. I'm 12. Because you're 12 years old and it's 17 degrees. Something in her face shifted. Not trust, not yet, but the door to trust opening a crack. "Okay," she said. He kept his word exactly. He booked the room, handed her the key card at the front desk in full view of the concierge, and left. He went home to his apartment and sat in his kitchen with a glass of water and his phone and thought about Renata Voss, who had been laughing on the phone about whether he would taste it. McGarry called at 11:45. "Your instincts were right," she said. "I'm still pulling threads, but there's a business partner named Fowler. You know him?" He knew Fowler. Derek Fowler had been angling to acquire Stuart's stake in a commercial real estate portfolio for 2 years. Stuart had refused every offer. "There are calls between Renata and Fowler going back 4 months, McGarry said. "She was never just a girlfriend, Stuart." He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth for a moment. 4 months. He'd introduced her to his attorney. He'd let her come to the portfolio review. "The wine," he said. "I'm working on it, But I'd strongly suggest you don't eat or drink anything she might have had access to and you haven't already confirmed safe. She paused. You're lucky someone warned you. She's 12, he said. A beat of silence. The kid who warned you? She's at the Kellerman on Michigan. She's alone. Her grandmother died 2 months ago. Another pause. Longer. Stuart, I know. You can't just... I know. I'm not doing anything tonight. But he lay awake for a long time looking at the ceiling, and he thought about what the girl had said. Because you crouched down. Most people don't. He went back in the morning with a proper coat. A girl's parka he'd ordered at 11 at night from a place that did same-day delivery, and 2 cups of hot chocolate from the cafe on the corner. He knocked on the room door and stood back where she could see him through the peephole. The door opened after a long moment. She looked at the coat and then at him. I didn't ask for anything, she said. I know. I brought it anyway. She stepped back to let him in. The room was very neat, her few things lined up on the dresser with a precision that spoke of someone accustomed to having very little and being careful with what they had. The dinner roll she hadn't finished last night was sitting on the nightstand, wrapped in a paper napkin. He handed her the hot chocolate and sat in the chair by the window. What happens to you now, he said, practically speaking. She wrapped both hands around the cup. Outside, the city was gray and enormous, lake wind pushing snow sideways off the rooftops. I turned myself in to DCFS, I guess. They put me in a placement. She said it without drama, the way you describe a process you've been through before. It's not bad usually. Sometimes it is. She looked down at the cup. The bad part is you can never tell in advance. He nodded. He thought about what he was going to say before he said it. I have a lawyer I trust. She specializes in family law. I'd like her to look at your situation, just to see what options exist. No promises, no decisions, just information. Pip looked at him steadily. Why would you do that? Because I have resources you don't, and last night you used the only resource you had, which was information, to save my life. It seems like the least I can do. She was quiet for a moment. The hot chocolate steamed between her hands. People say things, she said finally. Adults say they're going to help, and then things get complicated and they don't. I know. So why should I believe you're different? He thought about it honestly. You probably shouldn't yet, he said. I think you should wait and see what I actually do. And if I don't do what I say, then you were right not to believe me. He met her eyes. But I'd like the chance to be different. She looked at him for a long time with those brown eyes that had seen too much and trusted too little. Okay, she said. One chance. McGarry's report came in over the next 72 hours, and it was worse than Stuart had expected, which meant it was about as bad as he'd privately feared. Renata Voss's real name was Renata Kimura. She'd used 3 different identities in as many states. Derek Fowler had hired her through a third party, a consulting firm in Delaware that existed primarily on paper. The Barolo had been sent to a private lab, pulled from the restaurant's inventory before it was opened for service. Traces of a compound that caused cardiac events that presented like natural heart failure. He sat with that word for a while. Natural. He was 53, and he'd had a stress test 2 years ago that his cardiologist had called textbook. It would have looked like a heart attack. It would have looked like a very sad but not entirely surprising story about a driven man who worked too hard. Fowler and Kimura were arrested on a Thursday. It made the business pages. Stuart did not give interviews. The family law attorney, her name was Hutchins, sharp and thorough, met with Pip twice at a neutral location, with a DCFS caseworker present. Pip answered questions in the same careful, level way she did everything. She did not perform vulnerability. She did not ask for sympathy. She stated facts and waited to see what happened next. What Hutchins found was this. Pip's legal name was Philippa Okofor. Her mother had died when she was 4. Her father was listed on no birth certificate. Her grandmother, Adaisy Okafor, had been her only consistent caregiver, and Adaisy's death had left Pip legally adrift. There were no other relatives in the country. There was a great-uncle in Lagos, elderly, who had been notified and had gently indicated he was not in a position to take a child. Pip knew all of this. She'd known it since November. Stuart read the report in Hutchins's office, while Pip sat in the waiting room reading a copy of National Geographic that was 2 years old. He looked up at Hutchins when he finished. What would the process look like, he said, if someone wanted to begin fostering with an intent to adopt? Hutchins looked at him over her reading glasses. Thorough, she said. Home study, background check. Classes. 9 months minimum before placement, usually more. Then fostering period, then adoption proceedings. I understand. Stuart. She's a child with significant trauma history. This is not a small thing. I know it isn't. You're single. You travel. You have a demanding career, all true. Why? She said, in the flat, direct way that made her good at her job. He thought about the heating grate, the dinner roll wrapped in a napkin. Because you crouched down. Because she used everything she had to help a stranger, he said. And I'd like her to know that means something. Hutchins studied him for a moment. Then she took off her glasses and set them on the desk. I'll draw up the paperwork, she said. He didn't tell Pip that day. He told her he was moving forward with the process, and that it would take time, and that she would stay in a certified foster placement in the meantime. A woman in Lincoln Park named Gloria Andros, who had been fostering children for 22 years, and whom Hutchins trusted completely. He told her he would visit. He told her he would call. He kept both. He visited every Sunday. He called every other night. The first few weeks, Pip answered his questions in short, careful sentences, like she was conserving energy for the moment when the rug got pulled out. He didn't take it personally. He just kept showing up. In February, she showed him a drawing she'd done of the Chicago skyline. Precise, detailed, every window of the Hargrove Meridian, sketched in careful pencil lines. He asked her where she'd learned to draw like that, and she said her grandmother had taught her, and her voice stayed level, but her hands tightened slightly on the page. She was an architect, Pip said, in Enugu. She used to say buildings were just math that learned how to dream. He looked at the drawing for a long time. She sounds extraordinary, he said. She was. Pip looked at the drawing too. She said I had her hands. He found a Saturday art program at the Art Institute that accepted students Pip's age. He asked Gloria if she could take her. Gloria said, of course. 3 weeks later, Pip came home from the program and called him, which she had never done unprompted before, to tell him that the instructor had said her perspective work was the best in the class. He was in a meeting when she called. He left the meeting. The home study took 4 months. The background check was thorough and turned up nothing except that he had once received a parking citation in 2019 that he'd paid immediately, which the caseworker noted with what felt like mild disappointment. He took the required classes on evenings and weekends, sitting in church basement rooms with other prospective foster parents, learning about developmental trauma and attachment theory, and how children who have learned not to need anyone learn it so well that they make it very convincing. He thought about Pip the entire time. She was placed with him on a Friday in May, which felt appropriate, the kind of day that holds the promise of the weekend, of time that belongs to you. He'd prepared the room carefully, not wanting to presume too much. A bed, a desk, a lamp with warm light, a set of good drawing pencils he left on the desk without comment. He'd asked Gloria what color Pip said she liked, and Gloria had said Pip had told her she didn't have a favorite color, but she always seemed calmer around green things, so he'd put a small plant on the windowsill. When Pip walked into the room and saw the pencils, she didn't say anything for a moment. Then she picked one up and turned it in her fingers, like she was confirming it was real. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Of course," he said. She set the pencil down carefully, lined up with the others. Then she turned around. "I'm going to keep being careful," she said. "I'm going to keep waiting to see if you're real. I can't stop doing that yet." "I know," he said. "That's okay. It might take a long time. I'm not going anywhere," he said. She looked at him for a moment with those level brown eyes. Then she turned back to the desk and picked up the pencil again and began to draw. And Stuart stood in the doorway of that room, in his apartment 61 stories below the restaurant where his life had almost ended, and he listened to the quiet scratch of pencil on paper, and he thought that some things begin in the strangest places. On heating grates in January, in corridors where children make themselves small enough to be invisible, and that sometimes the person who saves you is the one the world has decided doesn't matter. 7 months later, on a cold Tuesday morning that smelled like the first snow of the season, a judge in Cook County signed a piece of paper that made Philippa Okafor Aldgate a legal fact. There was no ceremony because Pip said she didn't want one, and then at the last minute she asked if they could get pie after, specifically cherry, and Stuart said they absolutely could, and they walked out of the courthouse together into the sharp November air, and she put her hand in his. Not tentatively, not like a question, but the way you hold on to something you've decided to keep. And he held on too, and they walked to the car, and that was that. The pie, for the record, was excellent.